Hello and welcome to the Daily Poem here on the Close Reads Podcast Network. Technically, welcome to the trailer, the bonus episode, the preview episode of the Daily Poem. I'm David Kern. I'm here with Matt Bianco. We're just here to talk about poems for a second. Hi, Matt.
Hi, David.
Who's your favorite poet?
Wordsworth.
Why? He's gone.
Because somebody told me once that he is the most formal. But I don't mean formal like his poems all have a form. Maybe they do, I don't know. But that's not what they meant. But they meant like he's embodying a formal idea in his poems.
So you're in luck because the first week of the Daily Poem is going to feature a Wordsworth poem. And that first week is next week. Our first day is going to be August 20th, that Monday. And we are going to do, on that Thursday, we have a Wordsworth poem. So you're in luck. So if you subscribe, you can hear poems by William Wordsworth. In the first few weeks, we're going to be focusing on a lot of the most famous poems of all time. So you're going to hear from people like Shakespeare, Robert Frost, Byron, Wordsworth, as I said, Kipling, Poe, William Blake, Matthew Arnold, Yeats, Lewis Carroll, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Keats, Shelley, Donne, Dickinson, Auden, Tennyson, Longfellow, Barrie, T.S. Eliot, hacks like that.
Hacks, yeah.
Who's a poet that you wish you knew better?
Like personally knew better or
Sure.
or his poetry?
Either.
Wordsworth. Gerard Manley Hopkins.
Okay. And we will get to some Hopkins, not in the first couple weeks, but we're going to get to some Hopkins. We know a lot of you are going to be listening alongside your children at home or in your classrooms. We are obviously very excited and honored to be able to sort of participate in the academic and artistic life of your home. Each episode is going to be about 3 to 8 minutes long, depending on the length of the poem. In some instances, the poems will be a little shorter, so maybe we'll read them twice, like when we do the Wordsworth poem, which is going to be The World is Too Much With Us. That one, actually, I did that episode, and I read that twice because it's a sonnet. It's 14 lines, so it's, you can do it again. Some people will probably want to hear episodes or poems more than once, I figured.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're driving on your way to work, it's not recommended that you read while driving.
Right.
So just read the poem again for people like that.
That's kind of cool too, because you could put the episode on repeat.
You could.
And then memorize the poem that way. Like listen to it over and over again.
That's
and memorize
true.
it in your cadence.
Yeah,
whoever the reader is.
Yeah, that's true. Right? That's true. And speaking of which, it's not just going to be me reading the poems. Probably mostly people will have the misfortune of having to hear from me. But in other days, we'll have Matt's going to read some. We'll have different people from here at the office.
I will only read Wordsworth poems.
Or Hopkins, I guess.
Or Hopkins.
Other people from the Close Reads Podcast Network will be participating, and you might hear from people that have much better radio voices than me. Reading poetry is a necessarily interpretive act. You can't help but sort of interpret what's going on when you're reading it. So obviously when I or Matt or someone is reading, if you disagree with the interpretation, feel free to go leave that 1-star review on the iTunes page and argue with us. So we understand that, you may disagree, but feel free to record your own reading, send it to us on social media or something, and hashtag it with the Daily Poem, and maybe we can have some back and forth arguments about interpretive readings of poetry. So
I think that's why monks chant the Psalter, so that they're not putting in that interpretation too.
It's funny because when I was reading some of these first few poems, I came in at nighttime, so it'd be quiet, and I was sitting here and I was thinking, I'm just reading them how it feels like the language is being presented. Right. I was trying not to interpret an image or something. I was trying to follow the rhythms of the language. But then I was thinking, maybe I should just chant this or do it super monotone. But then I thought that probably doesn't help anybody either. So hopefully people will, if you're listening and you're listening with your children, hopefully when we read that Wordsworth poem and you hear me butchering it or doing it the way you don't want to, you'll read it with your children, read it in your classrooms, let your kids follow how they feel the rhythms of the language are going. I suspect that for many of you, just that comparison, creating your own types of poetry reading will allow you to compare to what those of us who are reading on the show did, and that will bring the poems even more alive.
A good learning experience too.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, there's going to be lots of poems, hundreds of them, in fact, because there are, in fact, hundreds of days throughout a year. Matt?
Several hundreds.
300. more than 300. Is there a poem that you listened to growing up that maybe you don't have memorized, but that for some reason the experience of hearing it has been stuck in your imagination, in your memory?
No. Isn't that sad?
I have, it's funny because my parents read a lot of poetry to me, but I have very few of those, and I'm just trying to figure out why. So one of my things is I think it might be because it has to be a habit.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we want to do is like create a habit of listening and hearing poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And so hopefully what we can do on the show is help people cultivate that habits in their home, because even 1 or 2 minutes a day of just having the language of poetry and the sense of poetry going in and out of your ears and repeating it yourself and getting the sense of it, I think can go a long way in cultivating that kind of a poetic imagination in our children and in ourselves as adults.
Right. Well, this is a small sample size, but I've noticed that when I ask people if they have a favorite poem, the people who say yes, they have a favorite poem, and then you ask them
Wordsworth.
And if you ask them what that favorite poem is, they almost always tell you. They almost always name a poem that they memorized as a child.
Mm.
And
so it really matters what you have your kids listen to.
It does, right? Right. Yeah. So it's fascinating. Like you ask them what's your favorite poem, and then you ask them like how they came into contact with that poem, and then they'll say, "Oh, in second grade, my teacher made me memorize it, or my mom made me memorize it, or whatever." Right.
So the one thing we don't want is the only poems our kids to be memorizing to be like Taylor Swift lyrics or even the Beatles, right? Like we don't want a Hard Day's Night lyrics to be
right
the poems that are the only poems our children are listening to. So most of you that are listening, that's probably not a problem, just because you're actually listening to this podcast. But hopefully we can help cultivate a kind of poetic imagination alongside you. It's not just for you. This is going to be useful for us too. So thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for leaving those 1-star reviews because you don't like our interpretations. But, what do they say? All publicity is good publicity.
Right. That's what they say.
That's what they say.
Well, this is cool. I'm excited.
Well, thanks for joining me for this preview, which is probably going to be the longest episode ever. For Matt Bianco, for all of us here at the Close Reads Podcast Network, I'm David Kern. This has been the Daily Poem, and we are excited to bring you episode 1 on August 20th. Thanks for listening. Thanks.